Hey, we're back with more news. This is the Australian Bitcoin podcast, sponsored by hardblock.com.au. We're here with a whole lot of news this fortnight.
A bit of a price recap. So Bitcoin's price has continued to hover around our infamous US 58K line of resistance. It's been a bit of a meme from the previous cycle. Low 78,000 earlier in the month, and then a high of about 89,000, almost 90K. If we zoom out, though, Bitcoin's up 120% over the last year. It's up 432% over the last 4 years.
Over with the US ETFs, on September 13th, we had a single day inflow of 263 million US dollars, or in Aussie dollars, 390 million, which was pretty small in comparison to the record net inflow of almost 500 million US dollars, or 720 million Australian, on July 22nd. Strangely, BlackRock's IBIT ETF had zero net inflows on that September 13th day, after the US ETFs had seen a total of 715 million US dollars, or just over 1 billion Australian dollars, in outflows the week earlier. Onto the Australian ETFs, Monochrome's IBTC, which is the largest Aussie Bitcoin ETF, has increased their total holdings to almost 100 Bitcoin, which is pretty good for Australia. The other Aussie ETFs are ramping up slowly, just like the US ETFs did at the start.
Yeah, September 13th. It was Friday the 13th. The markets were running spooked.
In mining news, we saw two solo miners win blocks that we know of so far this month. They earned over 250,000 Australian dollars each, and they were mining with solo.ckpool.org. Apparently, one of the smaller miners that won was 38 petahash, and they're expected to win a block every 4 months or so. And the other lucky winner, with 82 petahash, is expected to win a block every 2 months on average. These miners weren't a single ASIC or Bitcoin hashing machine, but were actually the equivalent of 380 or 820 mid-range ASICs, respectively.
Yeah,
so
okay.
Pretty big systems for a solo miner.
Yeah. So it's still a pretty big operation. They're just mining into a solo pool.
In further Bitcoin mining news, Norway has been battling their impending energy crisis with strict regulation on data centers and Bitcoin mining companies as well. However, the efforts have caused some public disturbance in one town in Norway, where the end of operation for one Bitcoin mining facility caused an electricity price increase of 20%. The facility was granted a permit to operate 3 years ago, with a yearly usage that was equivalent to apparently 3,200 households. Residents in the area had been complaining about the noise pollution from the facility for some time, but now they're facing a yearly cost increase of their electricity bill of up to 3,000 Norwegian kroner, or 415 Aussie dollars each year.
Yeah, that really bites into the wallet, doesn't it? This is a great illustration for us to have to just really point out that role that Bitcoin mining does have in helping to stabilize and decrease the cost of running electricity grids. It's a very, very powerful narrative that we have, but I guess up until now we haven't had such a great example of like what goes wrong when you push back against Bitcoin mining without really understanding what it is, which is good to see in a sense. Moving on with some more news, from Australia. The Australian Libertarian Party is in the process of developing and launching a Bitcoin maximalist policy platform. So John Roddick, a member of New South Wales Parliament and the Libertarian Party representative, has publicly been criticising the US government for their mismanagement of the financial system, and has been announcing that the Libertarian Party is going to be adopting a pro-Bitcoin stance. Some of his comments have been around the US public debt, which is now over $35 trillion, is increasing by over $1 trillion every 100 days. The Australian Libertarian Party is developing a Bitcoin policy platform that is going to be Bitcoin focused and promoting a free market currency solution to our monetary issues. Fortunately, here in Sydney, at Bitcoin Sydney earlier this month, we actually had John Roddick, state MP. He attended the meetup and he spoke to us about the Libertarians' policy platform around Bitcoin. So I guess some of the key takeaways were, very exciting to see that they're going with a pro-Bitcoin stance and not a pro-crypto stance, which is, to be honest, I was a little bit surprised by. I think it does take a little bit of understanding to separate Bitcoin from crypto. And I wasn't sure that local sort of political parties were getting there or were anywhere near there. What was interesting to see is also that Jan3, Samson Mao and Jan3 had a meeting with the Libertarian Party about a month ago. I think that might have really been setting the scene. Hopefully we see further engagement from political parties in the local Australian Bitcoin scene.
In further Australian news, the Australian Communications and Media Authority is trying to combat disinformation and misinformation online. There was a bill introduced to Parliament earlier in September to try and fight online disinformation and misinformation. We all remember how successful the e-safety commissar has been, so it seems they want to continue their fight for online censorship. They're looking to dish out fines of up to 5% of digital platforms' global revenue for non-compliance. And their targets include social media platforms, search engines, messaging apps, but doesn't include traditional broadcasting services or private messages. So they have some definitions of what they're calling serious harm online. And that includes harm to the operation or integrity of the electoral or referendum process, harm to public health, vilification of a group or individual based on factors such as race, religion, sex, or disability, intentionally inflicted physical injury to an individual in Australia, imminent damage to critical infrastructure or disruption of emergency services, and also imminent harm to the Australian economy. So the bill has not yet been voted on, and they actually want digital platforms to publish a report on their efforts to stamp out this harmful content and assess their platform's risk of disinformation and misinformation, as well as publish a media literacy plan. I mean, they're asking for a lot here. So the Australian Communications and Media Authority actually accept that they cannot request removal of content, but are instead trying to punish and disincentivize these platforms with fines. In the bill are some protections for satire and humor, professional news content, and content for academic, artistic, scientific, or religious purposes. And of course, there's been a lot of public outcry over free speech and censorship. And the draft bill actually accepted feedback from the public, and they received over 24,000 comments having a bit of a go at them. Another issue people are having with this bill is that the results are not made public to researchers, academics, or the public.
Yeah, this is a very scary bill they're trying to pull through. It's actually initiated, obviously Labor's trying to push it through now, but it initiated with the Liberals in the previous government. Something that we've had previously was that there were exclusions for the government themselves. They couldn't actually be deemed to be responsible for misinformation or disinformation. They've removed that, in some sense, an improvement. But we look over how the policing of, I guess, misinformation as it's occurred over the last few years, especially relating to things like COVID, and the real issue is the selective enforcement. So we bring in these laws and they give them a lot of powers, but then they're selectively enforced to support a specific narrative. And so that's the real risk with this kind of legislation. Something that was of, I guess, particular interest to us as Bitcoin is that one of the definitions of serious harm under this includes imminent harm to the Australian economy, as Pat said, but more specifically, it said undermining public confidence in the banking or financial system. So we're in the firing line. So yeah, if you can, do what you can to push back on such a ridiculous bill that hasn't been voted on yet. The Liberals were previously introduced the bill and then decided that they weren't going to push it through. But their main complaint was they didn't believe there was enough protections against religious discrimination or religious freedom of speech. And so with these protections they put in for specifically religious freedoms, it'll be interesting to see if the Liberals are now willing to support this, especially considering, I mean, both the Liberal and the Labor parties, the two major parties in Australia, they seem to be in relative lockstep in support of censorship against whatever the current narrative is. Some censorship news from across the pond. Brazilian courts are attempting to, they have banned X/Twitter, and any users in Brazil hiding behind a VPN are being faced with a daily fine. So the decision was enforced a couple of weeks ago at the end of August, which has divided Brazilians. Elon Musk and Alexander de Moraes from the Supreme Court have been duking it out over free speech for the last month, ever since Musk refused to comply with his order to block accounts of lawmakers associated with President Bolsonaro's right-wing party, as well as activists accused of undermining the Brazilian democracy. This has led to a threat of banning a nationwide ban for X and Twitter. And the intent would be that the judge would notify telecommunications company Anatel, who will then instruct operators, including those running ground stations for Starlink satellites, to suspend users' access to the website and app. They're also able to detect users with a VPN, and they're expecting to subject them to a $13,200, that's Australian dollar, fine each day. X is already banned in China, Russia, Venezuela, Myanmar, Iran, North Korea, and Turkmenistan, so we're looking to add Brazil to that list. It's also been temporarily suspended in Pakistan, Turkey, and Egypt. Musk and X not looking like they're going to comply at this time, making a statement that they're acknowledging the ban and that they're committed to free speech. Quote, unlike other social media and technology platforms, we will not comply in secret with illegal orders. Some other aspect of the story, which has been quite interesting, is that the judge has also been going after the assets of Elon Musk in other companies. So in Tesla, which has a fairly large capital investment there of some description, and Starlink as well. Yeah.
Over in Europe, we have an update to the Telegram investigation. The European government is investigating group messaging app Telegram under suspicion they were misreporting their user numbers in order to stay under the 45 million user threshold, at which point the company is subject to increased regulations and content moderation and data sharing, as well as a ban on targeted adverts. So the CEO, Pavel Durov, who was arrested and questioned last month, has not replied promptly to the EU probe, maintaining his usual style of playing hardball with these state actors who are all chasing him for information. The EU Commission spokesperson Thomas Rayner states that the EU have a way through their own systems and calculations to determine how accurate the user data is. So there was a report by the Financial Times who dug into Telegram's financials, and they found that Telegram is holding over 400 million US dollars in crypto, which is more than half of their total assets. At the end of 2023, they launched an integrated wallet on Telegram to allow users to store, send, receive, and trade cryptocurrencies that generated Telegram some revenue. They also sold collectibles, which includes usernames and phone numbers. And these two income streams together were 40% of Telegram's total revenue. But the actual reported profit or loss that year was an operating loss of 160 million Australian dollars.
I believe he's out on bail, isn't it? He had a multi-million-dollar bail amount. He's
$5 million bail.
Not allowed.
Yeah.
5 million. Yeah, he's not allowed to leave France at the moment. So we'll see how that develops.
We'll keep you updated.
Over in Japan, Japan's largest electricity provider is exploring Bitcoin mining. A subsidiary of Tokyo Electric Power Company is looking at Bitcoin mining using their excess renewable power. Japan is aiming to run their country on 50% renewable energy by 2050. That's their target. And just 10% of the expected lost or wasted electricity that would come from renewables, if used for Bitcoin mining, could equate to 360 billion yen, or the equivalent of Australian 3.8 billion per year. It's very encouraging to see them talking about Bitcoin specifically. I think this is a big step. Grid operators around the world are starting to recognize the benefits of Bitcoin, but it's the next barrier that we're starting to see them attempt to cross is this stigma around Bitcoin and just using the name Bitcoin. So it's very exciting to see them feel confident in using that.
In some more international news, Mastercard launches non-custodial Bitcoin debit cards in the EU. Following their crypto debit card, which they launched in August this year, the new euro-denominated Bitcoin debit card can be used at over 100 million merchants that accept Mastercard. It does also support shitcoins, which is a bit upsetting. And when users want to make a purchase, they must sell the assets backing the card, which they're holding in their self-custody wallet, and it's transformed into euros, which are made available on the card immediately, which is one of their selling points. The card is compatible with Apple Pay and Google Pay as well. The fees are competitive, but not the lowest in the space. you're looking at a 1.6 euros issuance fee, a €1 monthly maintenance charge, and a 0.95% withdrawal fee. Mastercard is looking to expand this service to other countries, so this is a pretty big step in mainstream awareness. Mastercard is obviously one of the giants in that financial sector, and it's a step in the right direction. It's non-custodial, which is great, and yeah, let's see what the EU thinks of it and where it goes from there.
Yeah, Mastercard is definitely a giant, but I think notably the number two, right? Visa and Mastercard are the two big payments giants, and Mastercard is number two to Visa. So I think that's an interesting dynamic. You always have the number two who's always looking for whatever edge they can get to number one, and I think we'll see the number twos of the world looking to adopt Bitcoin because it gives them that little edge to try and displace the big dog.
Speaking of the runners-up trying to take that first place off the big giants, so Switzerland's fourth largest bank starts Bitcoin trading. I'm not going to pronounce this very well, but Zürcher Kantonalbank announced on September 4th that they will be introducing cryptocurrency trading and custody services. So the bank manages over $200 billion in assets, and they will offer the new service through their mobile app, online banking, and traditional channels. And this move could encourage their competitors to act similarly and again forward that mainstream adoption and awareness of Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's interesting for sure. Like especially that they're looking to develop in-house custody solutions. At some point, the banks of the world are going to start adopting Bitcoin and crypto, as we're already seeing. But soon they're going to realize that, okay, well, if someone else is doing the custody for us, well, we're pretty much just a wrapper around their custody solution. We're not much of a bank anymore. So the actual banks that want to stay banks are going to have to figure out how to hold and manage and custody Bitcoin and provide custody solutions for people. The FBI have released a public service announcement warning of North Korean hackers. North Korean hackers are devising convincing and personalized social engineering tactics, attempting to steal Bitcoin and shitcoins, as well as steal funds from people using the American Bitcoin ETFs. I provided a link to the full notice from the FBI, which includes how the North Korean agents used individualized attacks, where they weaved a scenario that was enticing to target the individual. So they tailored it to the specific individual. They'd carry on a prolonged conversation to build rapport, get into situations that are allowing them to infect a device with either a malicious USB or otherwise infect a device. The social engineering actors also apparently tried to impersonate individuals, even prominent people associated with certain technologies. The FBI pointed out that the attackers used real images from the impersonated fake images of time-sensitive events and fake websites. Yes, social engineering attacks are occurring. We can only expect them to get worse. So probably in terms of getting Bitcoin, it's probably the easiest way to get Bitcoin. So you can expect that when that incentive is there, it's only going to grow. So you need to figure out how to protect yourself. Don't trust, always verify. Make sure you're using 2FA on all of your logins. Use a password manager if possible. There was a really good podcast a couple of months ago with Junseth, a Bitcoin podcaster, and he actually recorded a call he had with a social engineering attacker. It wasn't a North Korean attacker. It was actually a young guy who was based in the US, but very interesting to hear from their perspective, like how they view it, how they engage in these social engineering attacks. And I highly recommend seeking it out if you haven't already heard it, giving it a listen. A little quick announcement, which is move your coins off of Mutiny Wallet before they shut down. So unfortunately, the Mutiny Wallet project decided to shut down. So if you've been using them at all, then you want to get your funds off there ASAP before they close up. Their open source code, the project is all open source, so it can be self-hosted if you wish. But the app and website will be removed on December 31st at the end of this year. And they're urging all users to move their coins.
We have an update to the Tornado Cash saga. Earlier this month, there were some reports that hackers who stole 341 million Aussie dollars from Indian exchange Wazir X had begun moving the funds through Tornado Cash, which effectively hides the coin's history and prevents the taxman or law enforcement tracing those coins back to you when you sell them. Even though the developers of Tornado Cash are either stuck in jail or they're still in the court system. There was a UN report that North Korea laundered 219 million Australian dollars equivalent using the software. During the investigation into the Tornado Cash developers, the US Treasury was able to sift through millions of transactions from Tornado Cash, and they could only cite 3 instances of illicit Tornado Cash use used to launder funds. So the US Circuit Judge managing the case actually admitted that North Korea could just use Tornado Cash even if it was on the sanctioned list. There's nothing they could do to stop them. And in further update, developer Alexei Pertsev went through the system in the Netherlands. He's been denied bail 3 times now, and he has over 4 years left to serve in jail. Fellow developer Roman Storm went through the US courts, and he pled not guilty to all charges earlier this month and was released on a US $2 million bond. Storm's legal team are contending that Tornado Cash doesn't qualify as a financial institution that could be charged with money laundering. And this case continues to set a worrying precedent where developers are being blamed and imprisoned for other people misusing their creations.
Some further news, Robinhood has been fined for not allowing withdrawals. The state of California has settled with Robinhood, who used to be an investing platform, then turned into a crypto exchange. We previously covered their acquisition of Bitstamp, which was the world's oldest crypto exchange back in July. So Robinhood's been handed a $3.9 million, roughly $6 million Australian dollar fine for not allowing self-custody, for misleading customers about where their assets were held, and as well as falsely advertising that they would connect customers with the best prices. This is for behavior covering the period from 2018 to 2022. Robinhood has apparently gladly paid the fine and moved on, but they've gotten away with not giving customers the assets they paid for, and the only way to get your money out during the period was to sell the asset and withdraw. It's an interesting development out of the US, especially from the state of California, and it's a good sign for consumer protection when it comes to cryptocurrency. The standard should be self-custody, and not even allowing withdrawals was a pretty big red flag.
We've had some more Bitcoin ASIC confiscations around the world. The Russian government seized 238 ASICs using electricity meant for domestic use in a new raid. The authorities claim 68 million rubles, or 1.1 million Australian dollars, of damage was caused by the miners by using electricity intended for domestic use in the area. They were in an agricultural and gardening district, and it's unknown how many of these confiscated machines were Bitcoin ASICs. The Russian climate and cheap power is actually making it a really great spot for Bitcoin mining, and I wonder where all these ASICs are going. Over in Thailand, authorities have raided a mining farm west of Bangkok after one too many complaints about blackouts in the area. The house was rented by a company and used a large amount of power starting around July, but it seems like they were only billed and paid for a small amount. Authorities turned up at the house and a guard denied them entry. So they came back with a warrant, but the equipment had been moved, so nobody was arrested. Power theft has been on the rise in Thailand for years now, and Bitcoin miners are actually considered manufacturers in Thailand, which is pretty cool, but this means they must pay additional taxes. We've also covered Paraguay previously in a few episodes. They've been struggling with blackouts and seeing a lot of electricity theft as well. So much so that in a previous episode back in July, we covered how they've started jailing people for 10 years for electricity theft. They've also been hiking energy prices on legit Bitcoin mining operations. The energy mix in Paraguay is 1/3 oil, 1/3 hydroelectric, and 1/3 biofuels, where hydroelectric power is somewhat variable and creates an opportunity for load balancing solutions like Bitcoin mining. Earlier this month, an illegal mining site was raided and the machines were confiscated. 465 million Paraguayan guarani, or almost 90,000 Australian dollars worth of electricity each month. They seized 700 machines in this raid, making it almost 11,000 ASICs seized to date, as well as 50 transformers. The state-owned utility company has admitted it loses almost a third of the power it produces, but it notes that this is not all from Bitcoin and shitcoin miners. Apparently, 9 mining companies have left Paraguay due to these increasing electricity prices. Paraguay is actually a net exporter of electricity, but they still have a lot of issues with their electricity uptime. Nigeria is making headlines again this episode. Earlier in the year, the Nigerian government blamed Binance for the 70% decline in their currency, the Nigerian naira. The government wanted almost 15 billion Aussie dollars in compensation from Binance, and they put out an arrest warrant for Binance executives. One of the employees they nabbed was Binance's head of compliance, Mr. Gambarian, who is implicated in the investigation, facing charges of 52 million Australian dollars. The company Binance faces tax evasion charges as well. His bail hearing was at the start of this month, where he laid out his worsening medical condition. Apparently he was in a wheelchair and really sick with pneumonia and all sorts. But the judge has deferred judgment to another bail hearing on October 9th. So we'll see what happens with that. In some positive news from Nigeria, the SEC in Nigeria has approved 2 local exchanges and 5 digital asset firms for their regulatory incubation programs, which is a precursor to full registration. And other applications are being assessed.
And then just one final last bit of news, which is more consolidation in the Bitcoin mining space. So CleanSpark, the 4th biggest Bitcoin mining company by market cap, has reportedly bought 7 facilities in Tennessee, totaling 85 megawatts, which is the equivalent to 42,000 kettles running at the same time. That purchase was for around 27.5 million US, or roughly 41 million Australian. I'd say we're getting close to the end of the consolidation in the Bitcoin mining space, I would say. It's been a painful sort of 3 to 6 months for them since the halving. It'll be time to start to see things moving in the Bitcoin mining space, I would say.
So that was the biggest news from this fortnight. Thanks very much for listening. We'll catch you again in another 2 weeks for the end of September, where we will cover even more huge Bitcoin news. Thanks for joining us, Alex.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks everyone. Catch you next time.